There's a quiet room inside every human heart. Not the room where we keep our everyday thoughts. Not the place where laughter echoes after good conversations or where memories of simple joys live. No. This room is deeper. It's the room we rarely visit ourselves, let alone invite anyone else into. The hidden room. The one filled with unfinished sentences, unspoken fears, and truths that feel too fragile to place in someone else's hands. Most people pretend this room doesn't exist, but I know it does, because I've spent years standing outside the door of my own. Sometimes I could hear what was inside, the soft echoes of old mistakes, the whispers of doubts I thought I had buried, the quiet questions that show up late at night when the world is silent, and there's no distraction left to hide behind. And every time I heard those sounds, I did the same thing. I locked the door tighter. Not because I wanted to hide from others, but because I was afraid that if anyone ever walked inside, they would see things that would change the way they looked at me forever. You know that feeling, don't you? That strange tension between wanting to be known and fearing what will happen if you are. It's a quiet battle we all carry. On one side, there's the desire for closeness, the deep human longing to be understood, accepted, and loved without conditions. But on the other side, there's fear. The fear that if someone saw everything, every insecurity, every doubt, every moment of weakness, they might realize you aren't who they thought you were. And maybe worse than that, they might leave. So we learn to curate ourselves. We show people the parts that feel safe, the confident parts, the capable parts, the versions of ourselves that seem strong and stable and worthy of admiration. And slowly, without even realizing it, we build relationships based on edited versions of who we are. Not lies exactly, but not the full truth either. We share stories, but we skip the chapters that make us uncomfortable. We talk about the present, but avoid the parts of the past that still ache. We express love, but hide the moments when fear creeps in and makes us question whether we deserve it. And at first, this strategy seems to work. People like us, they admire us, they stay, but something strange happens over time. Even when you're surrounded by people who care about you, there's a subtle feeling that never completely goes away, a quiet loneliness. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being almost known, of having people close to you, but never close enough to see the whole picture. And that kind of loneliness can be exhausting. Because maintaining a curated version of yourself takes energy. You have to think about what you say. You have to monitor how much you reveal. You have to constantly balance authenticity with self-protection. It's like performing a role in a play that never ends. And eventually you begin to wonder something that feels both terrifying and liberating. What would happen if I stopped performing? What would happen if someone saw everything? Not just the confident version of me, but the uncertain one, the version that sometimes feels lost, the one that still carries old wounds, the one that doesn't always know what they're doing. Would they still stay? Or would that honesty become the moment everything changes? For a long time, I believed the answer was obvious. Of course they would leave. Why wouldn't they? After all, the world teaches us from an early age that love is conditional. We learn that approval often depends on achievement. Acceptance depends on behavior. Respect depends on strength. So we internalize a quiet rule. If you want people to stay, show them the best parts, hide the rest. And for years, I lived by that rule. But eventually, something happened that made me question everything I thought I understood about relationships. I started noticing something strange. The moments when people seemed to connect the most deeply weren't the moments when everything looked perfect. They were the moments when someone admitted something real, when someone said, "I'm struggling," when someone shared a fear they had never spoken out loud before, when someone allowed themselves to be seen without armor. Those moments created a different kind of connection, a deeper one, a more human one. And I began to realize something that changed the way I see relationships forever. People don't connect through perfection. They connect through honesty, Think about the relationships in your life that feel the most meaningful. The people you feel safest with. The people you trust. Chances are those relationships didn't grow because everything between you was flawless. They grew because at some point, someone decided to be real, someone decided to stop pretending, someone opened the door to a hidden room, and instead of walking away, the other person stepped inside. That's the moment intimacy begins. Not when two perfect people meet, but when two imperfect people decide to stop hiding. And that realization changed something inside me. It made me question the walls I had spent years building, because those walls had protected me from rejection. But they had also protected me from connection. And the more I thought about it, the more I understood something important. Safety and intimacy are not the same thing. Safety keeps us comfortable. But intimacy requires risk. You cannot experience deep connection without allowing someone to see the parts of you that feel uncertain or incomplete. And that's terrifying, because vulnerability feels like standing in the open with nothing to shield you. It means admitting things you would rather keep private. It means revealing emotions you've spent years learning to hide. It means trusting that someone will treat your truth with care, and trust is not easy, especially if you've been hurt before. Especially if you've experienced moments where openness was met with criticism or rejection. Those experiences teach us something powerful. They teach us that vulnerability can be dangerous, so we become cautious, we become guarded, we become experts at keeping certain doors closed. But here's the irony. The very walls we build to protect ourselves from pain often become the barriers that prevent us from experiencing love fully. Because love doesn't grow in carefully controlled environments, it grows in honesty, in transparency, in the willingness to say, "This is who I am," and to trust that someone might respond with understanding instead of judgment. The first time you open those hidden doors, it feels overwhelming. Your voice might shake. Your thoughts might feel scattered. You might wonder if you're making a mistake. But something interesting happens after that moment. After the truth is spoken. After the silence settles. You realize that the weight you were carrying alone is no longer yours to hold by yourself. And that realization can be incredibly freeing, because secrecy is heavy, pretending is exhausting, but honesty is lighter, not because it guarantees acceptance, but because it removes the burden of hiding, and that freedom is powerful. It's the freedom to exist without constantly editing yourself, the freedom to be human, to make mistakes, to grow, to change, to be seen as a work in progress instead of a finished product. And when someone accepts you in that state, something remarkable happens. Your relationship shifts. It becomes more than attraction, more than convenience, more than shared interests or routines. It becomes understanding, and understanding is the foundation of real intimacy. Because when someone truly understands you, they see your complexity, they recognize your struggles, they know your fears, and they choose connection anyway. That choice is what makes love meaningful. Not the absence of flaws, but the presence of compassion, the willingness to say, "I see you, and I'm still here." That kind of acceptance doesn't just strengthen relationships. It transforms people. It gives them permission to grow, to heal, to become more authentic versions of themselves. Because when you're no longer afraid of being exposed, you can focus your energy on something much more important, living honestly. And honest living changes everything. It changes how you communicate, how you love, how you trust. You stop trying to control how others perceive you. You stop measuring your worth through perfection. You start valuing something deeper, truth. And truth creates stronger connections than any carefully crafted image ever could, because real relationships aren't built on illusion. They're built on shared humanity, two people acknowledging that neither of them has everything figured out, two people learning how to support each other through uncertainty, two people choosing honesty over convenience. And that choice, repeated over time, becomes something extraordinary. It becomes trust, not the naive belief that no one will ever hurt you, but the belief that when challenges arise, you can face them together. That belief creates resilience. It allows relationships to survive misunderstandings, mistakes, and difficult conversations. Because the foundation isn't perfection, it's honesty. And honesty creates something rare, a space where people feel safe enough to be themselves. Not the polished version, not the idealized version, but the real one. And in that space, love becomes something deeper than most people ever experience. It becomes acceptance. The kind that allows two imperfect people to grow side by side, learning, failing, trying again, supporting each other through life's uncertainty. That kind of love isn't dramatic. It doesn't always look like the movies, but it's real. And real love is far more powerful than any fantasy. Because it lasts, not because everything is easy, but because both people are committed to honesty, to understanding, to growth, and that commitment creates something worth protecting, something worth nurturing, something worth risking vulnerability for. So maybe the hidden rooms inside our hearts were never meant to stay locked forever. Maybe they exist so that one day we can invite someone in, not to judge what's inside, but to understand it. And when someone accepts that invitation, when they step into those rooms and choose to stay, something beautiful happens. The fear of being known slowly fades. And in its place, something stronger grows. Connection. Real connection. The kind that allows us to stop performing, to stop hiding, to stop pretending we have everything figured out, and simply be human. Fully known, fully accepted, fully present. And maybe that's the most powerful experience any relationship can offer. Not perfection, but truth. There's a moment in every relationship that most people never talk about. It doesn't happen when you first meet someone. It doesn't happen during the exciting early conversations when everything feels effortless and every discovery feels magical. No, this moment arrives later, quietly, almost invisibly. It arrives the first time you realize that someone is starting to see beyond the surface of who you are. And suddenly, something inside you becomes nervous, because at that point, the relationship stops being simple. Up until then, it was easy. You could share stories, you could laugh, you could talk about dreams, plans, and memories, but none of those things required you to reveal the parts of yourself that feel fragile. None of those things required you to expose the insecurities you normally keep hidden. But when someone begins to see deeper, everything changes, because closeness creates a new question. A question that sits quietly in the back of your mind. What happens if they see the whole truth? Not the version of you that feels confident and composed, but the one that sometimes doubts everything. The one that carries mistakes from the past, the one that still wonders whether they are enough. That question can be terrifying. And because it's terrifying, most people respond in the same way. They protect themselves, they start editing their emotions, they soften their confessions. They keep certain stories locked away, not because they are dishonest, but because they believe honesty might cost them something they don't want to lose. Acceptance, love, connection. So they compromise. They reveal enough to feel close, but not enough to feel exposed. And for a while, that balance seems to work. The relationship continues, conversations remain warm, affection remains strong, but slowly a strange feeling begins to appear, a feeling that something important is missing. It's difficult to explain, because on the surface, everything looks good, you talk often. You spend time together, you care about each other. But underneath all of that, there's a quiet awareness that the relationship hasn't reached its deepest level, that there are still parts of you that the other person has never seen, and those hidden parts create distance. Not a dramatic distance, but a subtle one. The kind that makes you wonder whether the person beside you truly knows you, or whether they only know the version of you that you felt safe enough to show. And that realization can change the way you look at relationships entirely, because it forces you to confront something uncomfortable. Real intimacy cannot exist without vulnerability. You cannot feel fully known if you never reveal the things that make you feel exposed. You cannot experience complete acceptance if the other person has only seen the polished parts of your identity. But vulnerability is complicated because it asks you to do something that feels unnatural. It asks you to lower your defenses. It asks you to trust that someone will respond with empathy instead of judgment. And trust is never guaranteed. That's why vulnerability feels risky. You are essentially placing a fragile part of yourself in someone else's hands and hoping they will treat it with care. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't. And those experiences shape the way we approach future relationships. If someone once used your vulnerability against you, you may learn to guard yourself more carefully. If someone dismissed your emotions, you may begin to believe your feelings are inconvenient. If someone walked away after seeing your imperfections, you may start believing that love requires perfection. Those beliefs can become powerful barriers. They teach us to survive emotionally by staying guarded. But survival and connection are not the same thing. You can protect yourself from pain, but if you protect yourself too well, you also protect yourself from love. And that's the paradox of vulnerability. The very thing that makes relationships risky is also the thing that makes them meaningful. Without vulnerability, relationships remain comfortable but shallow. With vulnerability, they become deeper, richer, and more authentic. But authenticity requires courage. It requires the willingness to admit things that feel uncomfortable. Things like fear, things like insecurity, things like the quiet doubts we often hide even from ourselves. Those admissions don't make us weak. They make us human. And humanity is what allows relationships to evolve from simple attraction into something far more powerful. Understanding. Think about the people who have impacted your life the most. Chances are they were not perfect individuals. They were people who showed you something real. They allowed you to see their humanity, their struggles, their growth, their imperfections. And because they were real with you, you felt safe being real with them. That's how emotional closeness develops. Not through perfection, but through honesty. Honesty creates permission. When one person chooses authenticity, it often encourages the other person to do the same. Slowly, the walls between them begin to disappear. Conversations become deeper. Silences become more comfortable. And the relationship becomes something different, something more genuine. In that space, people stop performing. They stop trying to impress each other constantly. They stop hiding the moments when they feel uncertain or overwhelmed. Instead, they start sharing their reality, and reality is where true intimacy lives, not in idealized versions of ourselves, but in the imperfect, evolving versions, the ones who are still learning, still healing, still growing. When two people accept each other in that state, something powerful happens. They create a relationship that can withstand real life. Because real life includes mistakes. It includes confusion. It includes moments of doubt and moments of growth. A relationship built on honesty can survive those moments. A relationship built on illusion cannot, and that's why vulnerability matters so much. Not because it makes us emotionally dramatic, but because it allows us to build relationships that are resilient. Relationships where both people feel safe enough to be authentic. And authenticity leads to something that most people crave deeply. Belonging. The feeling that you don't have to hide parts of yourself in order to be accepted. The feeling that someone sees you clearly and still chooses to stay. That feeling can transform a person's life, because many people spend years believing that love must be earned through perfection. But real love doesn't operate that way. Real love grows through understanding, through patience, through empathy. It grows when two people allow each other to exist honestly, without masks, without performances, without unrealistic expectations. That kind of connection doesn't eliminate challenges, but it changes the way those challenges are faced. Instead of pretending everything is fine, both people can acknowledge difficulties openly. Instead of avoiding uncomfortable conversations, they can approach them with curiosity. Instead of assuming the worst about each other, they can seek understanding. Those habits create emotional safety, and emotional safety allows relationships to deepen over time, because when you feel safe being yourself, You no longer need to protect your identity constantly. You can relax into the relationship. You can focus on growth instead of self-defense. You can invest in the connection without fear controlling every decision. That freedom is one of the most valuable experiences a relationship can offer, but it only becomes possible when vulnerability is welcomed rather than feared. And welcoming vulnerability requires emotional maturity. It requires recognizing that when someone shares their fears or insecurities, they are not asking for judgment. They are asking for understanding. They are offering trust. Responding to that trust with compassion strengthens the relationship. Responding with criticism weakens it. That's why communication matters so much. Not just what we say, but how we listen. Listening with patience. Listening with empathy. Listening with the intention to understand rather than react. Those small actions create the environment where vulnerability can exist safely. And when vulnerability becomes safe, relationships reach a new level. A level where two people stop worrying about being perfect. They focus instead on being present, supporting each other, growing together, learning from mistakes, celebrating progress, facing uncertainty side by side, and that journey is what makes relationships meaningful. Not the absence of flaws, but the presence of honesty, because honesty allows love to become something real. Not a performance, not an illusion, but a connection between two imperfect human beings who choose each other despite the complexities of life. And that choice is powerful. It reminds us that love isn't about finding someone who fits an ideal image. It's about finding someone willing to see you completely and still walk beside you. That kind of love requires courage. But it's worth every risk, because being fully seen and fully accepted is one of the most profound experiences a person can have. It reminds us that we don't have to hide our humanity. We can embrace it. And when two people embrace their humanity together, they create something rare, a relationship built not on perfection, but on truth,